everyone. My name is Mahi, and welcome back to Close Encounters, the podcast. Hi, everyone. It's Mahi. Welcome back to Close Encounters, the show where we give students the platform to be who they want to be, because we like honesty. And today, we have yet another overseas guest. Our guest today joins us once again all the way from Boston. She has a way with words. If you're lucky to have a conversation with her, she exudes kindness and empathy into every conversation. And not only that, her genuine effort to have an open and honest dialogue with you not only makes the conversation seem entirely effortless, but also makes you seem heard. So let's welcome our guest today, Preandra.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Mahi. And yes, my name's Preandra. I also go by Pre for short, and I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. Finally got you on this. Really excited to have this conversation with you. So
Likewise.
how are you? Yeah. So how are you feeling today? How's life? How are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I'm glad it's Friday. Fridays always bring this fresh joy to the week, and the weather's really nice in Cambridge. So I'm really enjoying the day thus far.
Have you been up to anything lately? Have you been keeping yourself like busy in any way?
That's a great question. So I'm all about creativity and making sure I always have some kind of hobby when I'm just living life. And so something that I've been interested in picking up is starting a side business. And one of those things entails, so I love using my hands. And I was thinking, like, maybe I can provide some kind of service where I help others gift things to people who, whether it's like their birthday's coming up or they want to send them a thinking of you something. And so there is some brainstorming happening there, which has been fun. And also just watching Dr. House. I'm a big fan of that series.
Wow, that's exciting. I feel like these days everyone just has something to keep themselves occupied and creative in a way. And it's sort of leading to a lot more creative people and non-creative people like coming to the surface and like giving a shot at like trying something new. I think that's really exciting, and I love your idea of like gift starting a business about like gifting people things and stuff like that. I think that's really cute. Anyways, so so have you been in Boston like your entire life? What's the story behind that?
Yes, that's a great question. So, yet again, I'm originally from California, specifically Southern California. So I grew up there most of my life. And then I had a wonderful opportunity to move to the East Coast back in 2018. And this is a month after I graduated from my undergrad program. And I came here to work for a nonprofit, a peace learning and dialogue center. And so I've been here since 2018.
Wow. Do you prefer California or Boston? What do you think?
Yeah, I think about that a lot. And I will say, just like anything, both coasts have beautiful things to offer. What I've enjoyed about my time in the East Coast is public transportation is at a whole nother level. Like it was non-existent. I mean, we had some things in place where I was, but you definitely needed a car for convenience. And I'm not a fan of driving. So I do love the ease of public transport and the seasons. We didn't really have a distinct four seasons where I grew up. I never had to check my weather app. I just maybe carried around a jacket, but was fine for the most part. So I do enjoy the spring with the flowers and the fall with the foliage. And I think that's very special and unique to this area.
So, you just mentioned that you moved to Boston when you finished your undergrad. What were you studying?
Yes, so I went to a small private liberal arts university called Soka University of America, and it's a one major school, so we all graduated with a liberal arts degree, but there are many concentrations that we can concentrate in, and I ended up focusing on humanities because, well, there are many reasons why for my because, but more specifically, I had a professor who really moved me in terms of the ways I can deepen my relationship with literature and philosophy and things like that. So I have a liberal arts degree with a concentration in humanities.
Wow. That's good stuff. I definitely was into like getting into like a liberal arts university when I first started, but
Mhm.
options are really limited here. So you have to stick to the standard stuff, which is
Right.
business.
Mm.
I mean, you just make do with what you have. So you also have a Japanese background, which is really interesting. So it's kind of a part of your identity. I'm really curious to know, has your Japanese background and your sort of relationship with that culture influence your identity? And is there any part of the culture that you carry out in your day-to-day life, whether it's something small or something big? Is there any way you're sort of connected with the culture in that way?
Wow. I love this question, especially because it's one that I realize I keep reframing my understanding around as I really step into who I am. But I will say, so I grew up primarily under a single mother household originally growing up. Fortunately, my dad was always around, so I did have a father figure. It's just I lived with my mom, who was Japanese, and so everything from the things that I ate or the things that I watched, there was already that exposure to the Japanese culture there. But I remember my mom would always highlight how I had a natural curiosity to learn more about the Japanese culture. So I was always watching like anime or listening to really old traditional Japanese music to really try to understand the part of Japanese life that, not being there, I was farther removed from. And so that's just to set into the scene that I definitely, when it comes to my mixed identity, I'm Japanese and Black. And I think I definitely the, maybe this will help. I always like to tell people I'm like the color purple. You can make the color purple with red and blue, but you don't really want to be too nitpicky about like what percent of her is blue and what percent of her is
Mm.
red. And so if you think about my life as the color purple, I definitely, have my pastelly purple days where I'm maybe leaning more one way over the other, or other days where, you know, um, I don't really necessarily see the distinction of how the two parts of my life come out. But Japan definitely has a very special place in my heart. And the last thing maybe I'll say, which I think is very integral to why it is a big part of who I am, is I fortunately can speak the language. And so through that, really connecting with family and friends, and having that ability in the form of connecting to the culture through language definitely plays a part in how I also see and interact with the world around me as an American living in the US. Um, yeah,
Can you say a few words in Japanese?
sure. こんにちは、皆さん。私の名前はプリアンドラです。今日はマヒちゃんとポッドキャストをやってます。And so basically, I just
Oh,
said, hi, everyone. My name is Preandra. I'm doing a podcast with Mahi today.
I am learning. I'm a very much of like a language person. I love learning languages. So I'm
Same.
learning Korean. I know a little bit of Japanese, so I
Nice.
had a good understanding of what you just said.
Hey.
So, something interesting I find is that for us, children of color who are living away from home, I feel like a universal experience. We even see it in like the movies, I guess. It's
Mhm.
that when we're kind of disconnected from our homeland or motherland, and our culture in a way, we, even though we're like exposed to it, we tend to sort of go the other way, look the other way because we want to fit in or because we just feel like it makes us stand out in the crowd and not in a good way. A lot of the times kids want to walk away from their culture just so they can fit into that sort of clique of like, oh, I want to be like the cool kids. And I think my background just makes me seem really boring and like disinteresting. Have you ever had a moment like that where you're sort of like shying away from your background and you're just like, no?
Mm. Wow. This has me thinking of many different scenarios where maybe I felt that way. Um, One distinct thing that comes to mind, or just an example I want to share is, naturally in my lunchbox, there were rice balls and other things that weren't typical of an American lunch. But at the time, I I think my relationship to the more foreign part of my identity, in this case, Japan, was never really, I guess I had so much pride and confidence in how unique my experience is because I have both that even if there were weird comments or you know, things said where I had to kind of step back and look at myself differently. I never saw it as kind of like a I've been left outside or I can't conform sort of thing because I always felt like, well, I don't have to conform. Like, this makes me awesome. But as I get older, I do realize, especially as there's more conversations around recognizing your privilege and what that looks like, and knowing that I'm both Black and Japanese, and, being light skinned comes with different, pros and cons. And so there is more, I do think a lot more about like, um, it's weird to say like this, but I'm sure you can help me reframe it. I do think more about how my presence influences a space,
Mhm.
as much as before. Maybe I thought more about how other people's uh, identities or whatever influence me. As I become
Mm.
more confident in myself, it's more being mindful, like, what do I bring to the space? How can I change the way that I am while being true to myself and not like dismissing anyone else's experiences, if that makes sense. So that's just a roundabout way to say there is still a lot of unpacking I'm doing around my identity. But at the moment, I fortunately don't feel like I can't be who I am because I'm very confident in the intricacies that make me me. And so I'm just trying to find a way to share that through my stories, I guess.
Yeah, I think I that made like complete sense of what you said, because it's kind of like instead of focusing on the outward, you just focus on the inward, which is you. And instead of looking at how other people can influence you, you just turn to yourself and see how you can be a much more positive force in the lives of others and to everyone around you. So I like how you kept talking about confidence, confidence in not only who you are and embracing your culture and your heritage. Confidence is also such an integral thing for, especially if you were like back when my age, still in like your teenage years, we sort of struggle with that. So
Right.
how would you say you've sort of your journey from confidence, how has that been back when you were probably in like high school or something compared to where you are now in life?
Mm. I always love your questions.
Yeah.
And this is beyond the podcast too, but I will say, wow, I have so much appreciation for this moment because one thing that has been an integral, very important factor of why I'm able to be confident and work on that is the community that I grew up in. So I'm Buddhist, specifically Sogo Gakkai International. We're a Nichiren Buddhist sect. And I knew diversity from the moment I popped out of my mom's womb. Like every space I stepped into, there was people of all life experiences, different ages, different backgrounds, and because I was exposed to that ever since I was young, I think for me it feels more like I have these existential crises moments when I find myself more in spaces where they aren't diverse. And diversity speaks to my confidence a lot because already being exposed to just differences in such a healthy, beautiful way, it kept reinforcing why like I needed to keep walking in my own path so that I can really like contribute to this ocean of diversity as opposed to needing to think about like how do I fit in. It made me want to think about like how do I introduce something new to a space that needs it. So my Buddhist family, who are all around the world, people I've met and have yet to meet, definitely helped me on my journey with confidence.
That's amazing. I like how you just give each of your answers are like so profound and goes into like a much deeper level. And I really appreciate that, especially as someone who loves like deep conversations. I think I have an easier time connecting this conversation. It feels
Mm,
really good. So as you said, you've gone through phases of where you're like, what can I bring to the table? And what I understand is that when you were younger, you had moments of struggle with that where you're like, maybe I'm focusing too much on the outside and how other people are influencing me instead of how I can influence them. So, with the whole theme of like fitting in, have you ever had a moment where you're like, I just, have you been through that sort of phase of like loneliness where you're like, I'm gonna be by myself, whether that's like, in school or college, and you're just like, it's sometimes it gets like really hard.
Mm. Mahi, yes, yes. The answer is yes. But, this next question that you just posed made me want to highlight something that I didn't share in a response to another question, and that is being Black and Japanese. I recognize, I guess, what I mentioned about purple. I know, like, I'm 100% blue and I'm 100% red to make this 100% purple. But whether I'm with just Japanese people or just Black people, there are certain internal conversations and also like external conversations I've had or haven't had and am just aware of that have emerged that made me have to pivot more into like, it's weird to say like why it doesn't matter who I am, because who I am is important. But like, sometimes I felt like I wasn't Japanese enough because, Japan, I don't want to generalize, but just based on experiences, they are an island country. So it's a lot more homogenous, even though, we've globalized, it's less homogenous. So there is still this like foreigner effect where because I look this way and I'm not, white passing or even Japanese passing, it's like, how do you know Japanese? Or like, all these questions where as someone who identifies as Japanese, it's like, well, I just do because my mom was Japanese, There are those kind of discomforts I felt where I too had to learn that like there are other mixed people who have different experiences. Some people don't grow up speaking the language that is from this other country, other people do. And so that's where I pivoted more into that part of my journey, like what makes me unique even in the mixed population. But then, I'll be in Black spaces and it's like I sometimes feel like I'm not Black enough, whatever that means, And it's like there's never, I guess, to close this long-winded explanation of things, I more and more realize that I just have to believe in myself enough to where I don't second guess why I deserve to be in a space that I heavily identify with. Um, and the more confidence I can build, I do find that I'm better equipped to respond in situations of discomfort where something needs to be said, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So definitely, it can be lonely when I feel like I'm in it alone. But as I talk to more people, I realize I'm not alone even in that journey. So those moments of loneliness, I think, are healthy because it reminds me I need to connect, I need to seek experiences, I need to understand things like that.
That's I again, once again, I loved your answer. I think once again you're like connected to both aspects of who you are in a way, but I guess every person who has this sort of interesting background that makes them who they are, you're part this, you're part that. I think it's kind of like an imposter situation, right? Imposter syndrome situation
Yeah.
where, as you said, you're kind of like, maybe I'm not Japanese enough, maybe I'm not Black enough, so do I even deserve to be here in that kind of scenario? But I think, once again, like I said, I feel like you're comfortable enough at this stage in your life with your identity to be confident and embrace who you are. So I think that's incredibly special. Which
Mm,
brings me to my next question.
yeah.
We had a conversation a couple days ago, and this is coming from someone who's still in like that teenage era of things, kind of transitioning into the next stage of life.
Hmm.
You started talking to me about being in your 20s,
Mm.
and like adulting. There's a specific word, like being in your adulthood. Would you say, compared to when you first entered your 20s and where you are currently in your 20s, would you say you spend a majority of that time genuinely trying to figure out who you are and like figuring things out and being in sort of like that inner turmoil that people make your 20s out to be, or has it been a more like positive experience for you?
Mhm. Yes, I love this. I will say, people talk about turbulent 20s, and I think every time I go into a new phase of my life, I always try to step in with a blank slate because, there is the generalization of, how people live through every decade or whatever, but then there are also the experiences that don't fall within that. And I think the adulting dialogue we had came up for me in that moment because I've just been having so many experiences where it's almost like you go to school, you live a life at least up until, let's say, undergrad, maybe high school for a majority of people, where you think that everything you learn, as long as you like do it well, it's going to translate very smoothly into this phase called adulthood. And I don't want to dismiss that there were valuable experiences that I gained prior to this category of my life, especially these 20s that I call adulting or the beginning steps of it. Um, there is like, there's this realization that we never graduate from adulting. And I think that comes with me needing to be more clear with the goals that I want to set for my life, being more clear about what meaning making looks like in my life, because one thing's for sure, we're all born into the world, we all age, we all sometimes get sick in different ways. Hopefully not terminal, but sometimes unexpected things happen. Other times it could be cold, it could be a pandemic. And then lastly, we all die. So these are four things that, in Buddhism, we talk about this a lot. We go through. And so if this is a fact of life, and that's why life is suffering, we have to be able to make value out of it. And so to bring it back to my 20s, it's been a time where I really am understanding what that means. Like, what does Preandra making meaning of her own unique life look like? It's definitely still an open question, but I feel I feel like with every decade, I'm only in my second one. I'm more excited about the next decade because I do have the sense of like, let me try to find a PG way to say this. You learn you learn to care deeply while also learning to let go of the things that you need to let go of to also like do you. And that's sometimes hard. Because it comes with a lot of unlearning. It comes with a lot of learning anew. And that's an unknown open territory. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I quite answered your question there, but those are the thoughts that come up when you ask that question.
So does this apply to the same scenario of, compared to when you were a kid and where you
Oh,
are
right.
again right now as an adult? Do you think you've changed a lot in sort of, com when you were in the first decade of your life, in the tens and teenage years of that,
Mhm.
compared to now in the second
Right.
decade? I think the whole transition from going from high school into being a kind of fully functioning adult, while just learning new things. Do you
Yeah.
think you've seen this sort of big change in who you are? Because I look back at like this past version of myself, maybe 5, 6 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, there were things I couldn't do. I couldn't stand up to people. I was terrified of standing up to people.
Hmm.
Now I'm more comfortable with getting up and walking away because I've done
Right.
that 2 times and it's a very freeing thing, getting up and like walking away from things. Um,
Hmm.
but like if you told like 13 or 14-year-old me to do that, I would rather sit and take all the negativity coming from people instead of standing up for myself. So in
Hmm.
like small way, yeah, and you don't even realize that until you're sort of like sitting in your room and you're just like, reflecting on life or something like that. So would you say you've become that sort of person you've always wanted to be in a way?
Thank you so much for bringing it back in that, before now component too, because I definitely have changed a lot. And one big thing, and how do I want to phrase this? I'm always thinking about how I want to positively reframe, valid challenges. I was a people pleaser growing up. And, at that time, I don't think, I mean, it's not even, I wasn't aware that I was a people pleaser because I grew up in an environment where, we were very mindful of the causes we make to help others. And we always talked about like helping oneself and others. So it wasn't that, myself was never in the picture. But as a kid, even when I think about like the way I made friends, I wanted to get to know everybody. I wanted to be friendly with everybody. I did want to avoid conflict. So if something came up, like, maybe I was more inclined to watch or try to like always be nice in a traditional sense, to realizing in this decade, like sometimes being nice to a friend is saying something they really need to hear, even if it's a hard pill to swallow. Or sometimes it means like me learning how to express my discomforts rather than, allowing myself to sit through something that I don't have to if I just had the courage to share and be. And so, definitely, like, this decade has helped me lean more into what work can I do to transform those aspects of my life that had its purposes when it did. My people pleasing tendencies helped me get to know a lot of people. That's great. That had value. But now that I'm aware of how I want to not be that way, this part of my life has looked like, now what am I going to do about it? Especially outside of the structure that school settings gave you. We had more rehearsals or boot camps to like practice talking to new people, talking to our homies because we were always together. But once you're like out of the campus school bubble, you really have to seek those experiences on your own. And that has looked different between when I was young and now. But knowing that that's what I have to look for, I think practicing it has looked different too because I've changed a lot as well.
So people pleasing tendencies usually it goes hand in hand with having like a lack of boundaries for yourself.
Yeah, it's true. I didn't have boundaries. I didn't know I needed them, Mahi.
I speak from personal experience. Like I know I need them, but I kind of don't know how to do it. So it's
Mhm.
just I'm really interested in knowing your point of view for this. Is that, when we like navigating like toxic environments, especially if you're like a people pleaser, as I said, or if you're prone to adopting other people's feelings and emotions onto yourself, it makes you worry, it makes you think about all these things. It might be related to the other, and it can be like your own family as well, your parents, your siblings, your aunts, uncles, whatever, whoever
Mhm.
you're living with. It can be something that concerns them, but since you're aware of the situation, you take on their worry onto yourself, and you're just like, what is going to happen? What are we going to do? How's life going to work out? How do you navigate your way through that, and how do you protect yourself and you sort of build that resilience and inner strength, even though you try, but it's kind of like you become so weak, you're just like, ugh, I don't know what to do anymore.
Mm. Wow. Thank you for asking these questions that remind me the questions I have to keep asking myself too, because my initial response is how I'm so grateful that I'm working at a place where we're practicing dialogue and we really believe in dialogue as this transformative component to making the world a better place. And I think, when I think about situations that have been tough, where maybe I was lacking boundaries or the boundaries I had learned to set wasn't being met, it always went back to kind of what dialogues am I initiating with the people I'm involved with? And more so, what does that look like in relation to how I'm like having those same dialogues within myself? So, to be more specific, usually when there's conflict, I'm like, I want to go the other direction. I want to act like I wasn't in this. Like, you do you, figure it out. Let's like, let's keep peace. That was I'm learning how that wasn't the most um respectful even for the people involved, because if I'm trying to be authentic to myself and I want that to be the baseline for a connection with another person, especially in a situation that becomes challenging, the moment I'm unable to articulate how I'm feeling and trust that that articulation will be, even if it's not well received, that there's space for it, already I'm being inauthentic to myself. And I think that has always been like the root struggle for why overcoming certain conflicts were difficult, because I was always beating around the bush, like focusing on other people. But as I practice communicating, like, this is what I need, this isn't what's being met, or, I noticed this is your love language and this is mine, and how can we meet in the middle? Once I took hold of what that looks like for me, of taking responsibility to make it be known if it isn't, you know, it hasn't 100% like made all challenging situations fixed overnight or anything, but it at least has helped me develop the skill set to know that, like, don't let yourself be miserable in silence. Like, do what you can. And when nothing can be done, know that you still, as long as you're making causes to engage, that there was something you did. There was the best that you put out there, and that should still be celebrated is maybe the mentality I have around that. It's still a work in progress, but you know.
Do you think you've had any personal experiences where you may have seen like a family member struggle or, anything like that, and you're like in the space with them day and night, and you're kind of just like thinking for them? You know what I
Oh,
mean? Yeah, you're just like, okay, I don't know what to do, and this is stressing me out. I'm
yeah.
stressing out more than you are because I don't know if it's about your well-being. It could be about well-being or like finance, whatever. But you're
Mhm,
just like, I am stressing out for you and for the
mhm.
situation, and I feel miserable, but like I don't know what to do, and it's just making me feel really miserable myself. So if you have any personal experiences to make it a lot more sort of like, oh yeah, everyone goes through that.
Oh, yes. Yes. And I want to give a quick shout out to my pops because let's just say like I love having a raw live experience of what transformation and change looks like with just my dad and I. So love was always there. He always loved me. I always loved him. My parents divorced when I was 5, and with any divorce, there are challenges. And with any relationship, it's a two-way street. So what I'm about to say is really coming from this place of appreciating the dynamics which led to where my dad and I are today. But there are so many moments where I've been like overthinking on my dad's behalf or, worrying about certain steps he takes to go about something that look different from the way I would have done it and like seeing certain ways like his actions led to a certain result that maybe I wasn't happy with, even if it wasn't bad. And like, all these things that I used to nitpick over. I, in the past few years, so my mom passed away back in 2017. And so since then, my dad and I's relationship in a renewed way has really deepened so much more. And I will say that, like, the reason why our relationship deepened is because we were both on the same page about really getting to know one another more by like dabbling into the past, looking forward into the future, and doing so through conversation. And so now, anytime I have these moments of frustration with him, or he has a moment of frustration with me, our go to is always like, let's find a way to talk about it. Even if it's like, you know, my mental health's really low. This is where I'm at. We have like a little code we send each other so that we make each other aware of like where we're at and like how we need to support one another. And I feel like I know I'm not going super into detail around like the situations that have made me overthink on behalf of my dad, but really having like multiple moments where I was over worrying and how that impacted like sometimes negatively our relationship because I couldn't just trust my dad to now being at a place where I don't worry and I trust him fully because we are both intentional about like coming back and like working through those challenges that yeah, there's so many things I could attribute to the evolution of our relationship where I'm like this is why dialogue is great. This is why being yourself is always so important and this is why you can still do that while you're growing and while another person's growing too.
So I really admire that you're always up for, as you say, a dialogue, an open and honest conversation with someone because in the sense that all the conversations I've had with you, I enjoy the fact that, like I said, you extend empathy and kindness to the other person.
Oh,
But
thank you.
also because usually I'm always like the one asking questions to people. And nobody
Mm,
really asks me anything in return. So I'm always kind of there just like listening to the other person. But then it's kind of like, who's gonna talk to me? Ask me things and stuff like that. Um, so I think I really appreciate that you have the genuine you put in a genuine and effortless effort, I guess you can say, into getting to know the other person and talking to them in such a casual manner. So, would you say there has been any personal experiences that shaped you into becoming this way, or have you always been such a natural, like, open person into just getting to know the other person as well?
mm, wow. Wow. Well, first, thank you. I love to extend my thank yous because you, being a newer friend in my life, I appreciate the reciprocity around. really listen and share with one another. And wow. I guess wow. That's a powerful question. Hmm. Can you reframe that for me one more time while I like narrow my thoughts?
Yes. So, have you always been someone who's been very open to having an honest conversation with people in terms of like asking them questions about themselves? Like, how
Yeah.
are you? How are you feeling today? And if they say they have like a problem, you ask questions pertaining to that problem, eventually to the point where at a subconscious level or something, they might even find a solution for their issues. So,
Mm, mhm.
has there been a personal experience in your life where that sort of led you to being more open with others, or were you always like a people person, I guess you could say?
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you for saying it again, because that helped me narrow it down to this one major life experience. Um, so yes, I was always an open book. I love people. So I was always sharing maybe more than people expected to hear of me. And I was always
Yeah.
talking to strangers. I love that because how else? I mean, that's where the juice of life is, right? But I will say the moment in my life which significantly impacted the way that I have become more open myself with others goes back to when my mom passed away. And so, granted, like I said, I was always extroverted. I will talk with anybody, but one thing I didn't do a lot of was really share like my darkest struggles or really share like the things that were taboo for me. Like that's what friends are for, right? You're supposed to lean in on their wisdom as you grapple with your own. And it wasn't until my mom passed that I realized, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do that with anyone except for my mom. Like she was my go-to person. I went to her about like, everything from crushes to like school drama to like just everything. She was my go-to. And when she passed, I had to remember that, that relationship ending shouldn't stop this journey of me continuing to be open. But that also made me realize I need to learn how to be as open as I was to her with more people. And so losing her at the time that I did, which was my third year in my undergrad degree, I definitely learned a lot about what it means to be open with your close friends, especially with the difficult things. And I think that has helped me become even more open than I was before because I've learned to trust more than just myself and at the time my mom. Like I really learned to trust these great relationships that I was fostering. So yeah, they say with every ending comes a new beginning. And as I was trying to understand what that beginning looked like for me when my mom passed, to this day, and you posing that question, I realized that, yeah, the beginning is I've been more deeply connecting with others because of it.
Wow. I mind blowing. I think that's definitely an area I struggle with because I used to open up to people like this. Like it was so easy for me to like when you're a kid, you don't think much, right? Because when you're like in middle school or high school, you just sort of open up to your friends and you're like, oh, this happened. This is happening at home. I'm so annoyed. Ugh, whatever. I feel like at the same time as you grow older, the number of people you share things with just sort of minimizes, and eventually, like it's it's like you're the only one left, so you don't really talk to anyone or share things with others. But I also feel like it depends, on the kind of people you're surrounded by. Sometimes you just can't help the type of people you're surrounded by. So I think it's really important that you have those people who you can open up to occasionally, not like all the time, but like occasionally, and they like help you through it and help you understand things. I think that's incredibly special. And I want to say that you're always a positive person, but I know that would be sort of like a misconception because it's really hard for people and no one can be positive 24/7. So how do you manage to keep yourself so positive and grounded and like upbeat, I guess I want to say? And are there any like personal struggles that you're facing right now that, or maybe you have faced in the past that sort of made it really difficult for you to get out of that dark hole, I guess I want to say?
Oh, yeah, totally. First, thank you again for the compliment. I'm so happy and delighted to hear that I still come across more optimistic than not because it is something people often find surprising when I say it out loud is yes, to many it seems like second nature the way that I am. And on the one hand, it really is because thanks to the spaces I was in, the people who surrounded me, really grew up in a prime location to build those habits or build the confidence that hope is really what allows me to be positive. But it doesn't take away from the fact that there is still effort, like you said, not everyone's happy 24/7 or positive 24/7. And I think the going back to the Buddhist part of my life, all Buddhist spaces I stepped into, they constantly reaffirmed why I want to choose to be hopeful over pessimistic because life is suffering. There's so many chaotic things happening in the world, many of which are outside of my control. But if I lived a life where I just constantly succumb to that, of course my life would be miserable. Like, I mean, if for those who watch Dr. House, I probably would be like a Dr. House. But because of my Buddhist friends, my family, everyone, not just limited to the Buddhist community, but for people who allowed me to really like share both the goods and bads of life in ways that really help me see how it translates to the person I'm becoming. I feel like that's consistently what keeps me optimistic. The recommitting to deciding to be that person versus this other person of me that's very present. Like when I'm negative, girl, I'm negative. But I know there isn't always a lot of value putting that out there if there's more ways in which I could pivot towards my optimism. So, yes, I think the last thing I'll say is I'm in this new phase of my optimistic identity where I'm also trying to believe even more so that whenever I share something that isn't positive or doesn't appear like the people are used to, that I am able to articulate to the person who's in that environment how much I trust them and how much I'm showing them the side of me because that allows me to still help the positive side of me keep strong, if that makes sense. So it's a practice, but you definitely can't do it alone.
Wow. So I have one last question before we move on to a
Yeah.
little game that I came up with. Okay, so if you had to tell people who Pre really is, if someone comes up to you and asks you, who are you really? Without holding back, without thinking so much, without thinking of all the different aspects you need to mention, how would you describe who you really are in the most authentic way possible without any limitations?
Hmm. I would say I am Preandra Lika Noel. I am another human like you, and I'm just living a life that I'm living a life that I feel is building on what being absolutely happy means. And so, because happiness looks different for everybody, I think however I would introduce myself would just emphasize that, like, I'm not playing. I'm here to really live the best life, and I'm doing so by being as creative as I can with what that looks like for me and sharing what that looks like for me with others so that at least I can contribute to this culture of expanding our social consciousness.
Ooh,
But maybe the one liner is I would just say I'm human. Human is so
wow.
diverse and plentiful in and of itself. So I think that's yeah, maybe I would just say I'm a human actually.
Wow. That's amazing. It's also kind of like now that I've had this conversation with you, I obviously understand just what those like two words mean. Like I'm human, going through the human
Mm,
experience. I think yeah. Do you ever get like those moments where you're like, ugh, I'm so tired. You're just like, you go get up in the morning early, you go for work, you come home, you're just like, I'm tired. I'm tired of this. I don't want to do this anymore.
yeah, I mean, no doubt. I definitely feel that. And also, I think that's a good sign because that means at least I'm living a life that brings up these challenges or brings up these things that fatigue me, right? So
Oh,
I definitely feel it. It's not always fun, but I know it's a good sign.
amazing. All right, let's move to the final part of our episode, which is a rapid fire game that I came up with.
Ooh.
So, yeah, don't think too much. Just prepare yourself any way you have to. Just be quick.
Okay.
All right?
Oh, be quick.
Okay. Okay. What is a weird fact people don't know about you?
I like pineapple and olives on my pizza. Those are my two favorite toppings together.
Okay. 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 What is the last show you binge watched?
In its entirety,
Yeah, just like without stopping, you're just taking over your life.
I haven't finished, but it is taking over my life. One Piece.
One Piece. Oh, so many episodes.
Yeah.
Oof. What about Doctor House? Are you enjoying that so far?
Enjoying it and close to the finish.
Oh, that's sad. I always cry when I finish a show I like.
Yeah.
Do you have any K-dramas that you're enjoying at the moment or have enjoyed in the past?
Oh, I have to pick it back up, but I did start watching Queen of Tears,
Ooh.
and I'm appreciating how this is the K-drama that's bringing me back into the K-drama verse.
Oh, nice. What was do you remember your first show?
My very first show was a Korean drama called Bad Guy, maybe? It was about
Oh,
this guy who was like estranged from his family, but I think he was like coming back to this family because they were like very rich. And, anyways, you know how dramatic K-drama is.
yeah, for sure. All right. When was the last time you cried?
I'm a crybaby by nature. I'd like to say, did I cry yesterday? I think I did cry yesterday. Yeah.
Oh no.
But it's sometimes good tears, you know? So,
Oh, I cry all the time, so who knows? Actually, yes. I think I cried this afternoon a little bit. It's more
hmm
out of like frustration, but I mean, you get it.
Yep.
Okay. So, if you could spend the day with anyone, fictional character, celebrities, dead or alive, who would it be?
Dead or alive, including fictional characters. I always wish that I had the chance to meet Michael Jackson. I know there's a lot there, but for me, he holds a special place in my heart. I'd love to hang out with him.
Amazing. You know, when I was a kid, I was deathly afraid of Michael Jackson, like scared.
That's
I would
so.
start I would start crying if I saw him. I would be afraid he'd show up in my room at the night. Like,
I'll help you
yeah.
reframe that in a future conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I think now I'm sort of coming to terms with that though, but yeah. Okay. And this is a really interesting question. What would your handbag say about you?
My handbag? I think it would say that I'm very comfort. I'm all about comfort more than the aesthetic. I'm all about comfort.
Yeah, way to go. That's amazing. All for that. I think I'm finally learning to have like my essentials in the handbag. Before it used to be like my phone and just like a tissue or something, but now it
Yeah.
makes me feel like really happy to have like lip gloss and a wallet and stuff like that. I feel like
Ditto.
so
Yeah.
fun. Yeah, it's exciting experience. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode. Fortunately, I was having so much fun. Ah,
Yeah, I know, me
but
too.
but before we end it, are there is there any words of wisdom, or as I like to call it, wow. Is there any words of wisdom
Ooh.
that you would like to share? Any message you want to put out there?
Wow. I mean, yeah, literally, wow.
Wow.
Wow. Well, first, I'd love everyone to keep tuning into this series because Mahi, you are an amazing podcast host, and I know there's a lot of effort you put into making this happen. But my personal wow is maybe I'll share something I think about every so often because my grandma shared it with me. She once told me, always have you a hobby. And I
Mhm.
think the older, I'm still young, I know, but as I age, I see how difficult it can be to hold yourself a hobby if you're so overwhelmed by the day-to-day realities. So, yeah, if you're struggling, and even if you're not, I hope you can find a hobby that sparks that joy in you that can keep you going. Because I'm doing
Amazing.
that.
Yeah, fun. I love that. So that brings us officially to the end of our episode.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you, Bree, for being here. Really happy
My
to have you here.
pleasure.
If you enjoyed this podcast and you want to be a part of it, you can definitely do so. Just look at the details on the screen. Popping up here and there somewhere. Thank you for watching, and I will see all of you in our next episode. Bye bye.
Bye.